The summons hit my porch like a hammer, and I had not even swept the sawdust off my boots yet. I was standing beside the last cedar board of my new fence, the evening air thick with rain-soaked dirt, fresh-cut wood, and the metallic snap of my father's old blue chalk line still hanging from my tool belt. The fence was straight. I knew that because I had measured it twice, stretched the chalk line from stake to stake, checked the county setback, and kept every post inside my property line by more than 12 inches. It was not fancy. It was not meant to make a statement. It was 6 feet of cedar privacy between my farmhouse and the constant parade of Pine Hollow Estates residents who had been using my side yard like a shortcut for years. Then a man in a brown jacket stepped onto my porch, asked if I was Daniel Mercer, and handed me a thick, white envelope with the county court seal in the corner. Across the road, parked beneath the stone entrance sign of Pine Hollow Estates, Evelyn Hartwell sat in her white SUV with both hands on the steering wheel, watching me like she had already won. I opened the envelope right there on the porch, with sawdust sticking to my fingers and rain tapping against the tin roof. Pine Hollow Homeowners Association versus Daniel Mercer. The lawsuit demanded immediate removal of an unauthorized fence, payment of accumulated fines, reimbursement of attorney costs, and an injunction preventing me from making any further exterior changes without architectural approval. I read the first page twice because my brain kept rejecting the arrogance of it. My fence, my land, my farmhouse, their lawsuit. The process server walked back to his car without a word, and Evelyn stepped out of her SUV in a cream blazer, pearl earrings, and the kind of calm smile people wear when they mistake paperwork for truth. Behind her, Pine Hollow looked perfect in the wet evening light. Matching mailboxes, trimmed hedges, gas lamps, stone columns, and a curved road that made the whole subdivision feel older and more important than it really was. My farmhouse sat beside it like an honest memory nobody had managed to paint over, white siding weathered at the corners. Gravel drive, workshop out back, tomato beds near the kitchen window, and the new cedar fence running along the side yard in a clean line my father would have respected. Evelyn crossed her arms and called from the road. "Mr. Mercer, this could have been avoided if you had followed the approval process." I folded the summons slowly and looked at the blue chalk dust still on my thumb. My father had used that chalk line for cabinets, porch steps, barn doors, anything that needed to hold true after the hand let go. He used to say a crooked line only gets more expensive the longer you pretend it is straight. I looked from the court papers to Evelyn's smile and finally understood what Pine Hollow had been pretending for years. "There is one problem," I said. "I do not belong to your homeowners association." Her smile did not move. Everyone says that when they do not want rules. That was her first mistake. Her second was putting that sentence in front of a man who kept every deed, plat map, tax bill, and closing paper in a labeled cabinet beside his workbench. I did not argue with Evelyn from the porch because she was not standing there to understand me. She was standing there to be seen winning. So I took the summons inside, wiped sawdust off my hands with an old shop towel, and laid the papers on the dining table under the yellow light my sister Rachel always said made every problem look like a church basement meeting. The house was quiet except for rain ticking against the windows and the faint smell of cedar drifting in from my clothes. Pine Hollow's entrance lamps glowed through the front glass, soft and expensive, like the subdivision was trying to make itself look historic by shining light on new stone. My farmhouse had been here long before that stone sign, long before the matching mailboxes, long before Evelyn Hartwell discovered that a clipboard and a blazer could make ordinary neighbors afraid to ask questions. I bought the place from the Bell estate 9 years earlier, after old Mrs. Bell passed, and her children sold off the last piece nobody in Pine Hollow seemed to understand. It was not large, just a farmhouse, a detached workshop, a gravel driveway, tomato beds, a few maples, and a side yard that ran along the edge of the subdivision road. But it was mine in the way land becomes yours when you work on it after sunset, repair the same porch step twice, learn which corner floods in March, and wake up knowing every creak in the floor before coffee. I built cabinets for a living, custom kitchen work mostly, sometimes built-ins for lawyers with lake houses, sometimes shelves for young couples who saved for months to afford something real instead of pressed board. Straight lines mattered in my trade. A 1/16 of an inch could make a cabinet door rub for the next 20 years. That was why I built the fence slowly, post by post, with the old blue chalk line my father left me and the county setback printed in a plastic sleeve. I did not build it to start a fight. I built it because Pine Hollow had been treating my yard like a convenience. Residents cut through to reach the walking path. Landscapers used my gravel apron to turn their trailers around. Delivery drivers left packages on my porch for houses 3 streets inside the gates. One Saturday, I found a golf cart parked beside my workshop while 2 teenagers took pictures of my tomato beds because someone online had called my house the rustic entrance feature. That was the phrase that finally did it. Entrance feature. Not home. Not private property. Decoration. I sent polite emails. I put up small signs. I spoke to the Pine Hollow manager twice. Nothing changed except the tone of the letters that started arriving from Evelyn. First came a notice about unapproved visual barriers. Then one about community sightline obstruction. Then one claiming my cedar boards violated Pine Hollow's approved exterior materials list. I answered every letter the same way, with a copy of my deed and a sentence so plain a child could understand it. My property is not part of your association. Evelyn responded by adding fines. $50. Then $100. Then daily penalties with late fees stacked like bricks. Rachel came over that night after I called her, still wearing her bookstore sweater, hair pinned up with a pencil, and the expression she used when she knew I was calm in a dangerous way. She read the lawsuit once, then looked toward the window where Evelyn's white SUV had finally disappeared. "Daniel," she said, "please tell me you kept the closing binder." I stood, walked to the workshop, and opened the labeled cabinet beside my bench. The blue chalk line hung above it, dusted with cedar powder. Under it sat the binder, the deed, the tax parcel records, the old plat, and every letter Evelyn had ever sent. I carried the stack back inside and set it on the table beside the summons. Rachel smiled without humor. "Good," she said. "Let us teach Pine Hollow what a boundary looks like." By 10 that night, Rachel had turned my dining table into an evidence grid. She made one stack for violation letters, one for fine notices, one for my written responses, one for photographs, and one for documents that actually mattered, meaning deeds, tax records, and plats filed with the county instead of opinions printed on Pine Hollow letterhead. I brewed coffee strong enough to hold up a spoon and watched her tape sticky notes to each envelope with dates in black marker. There was something almost comforting about the order of it, paper lined up beneath the kitchen light, while rain softened the whole world outside. Evelyn wanted chaos. She wanted me angry, embarrassed, cornered, and tired enough to pull down the fence just to make the letters stop. Instead, every page she sent became one more board in the structure she did not know she was building for me. The first notice had arrived 6 months earlier, 2 days after I set the first posts. It called my fence an unauthorized exterior structure visible from a community entrance. I had laughed then, not because it was funny, but because it sounded like someone had looked at my home and seen a backdrop. I mailed back a copy of my deed and the tax parcel map. The second notice accused me of using unapproved cedar, even though Pine Hollow had never approved or disapproved anything on my land, because Pine Hollow had no authority there. I mailed back the deed again, this time highlighted. The third notice said my fence interrupted architectural harmony. That one sat on my workbench for 3 days because I kept reading the phrase while sanding cabinet doors and wondering what kind of person thought harmony meant strangers walking through your side yard. Rachel found the newsletter next, folded inside one of the envelopes. Pine Hollow Monthly, printed on glossy paper with Evelyn's president message at the top. Near the bottom, under a section called Protecting Our Shared Standards, she had written about a neighboring owner refusing cooperation and creating a visual barrier near the entrance corridor. She did not use my name, but she did not need to. The whole subdivision could see my fence from the stone sign. I remembered that week clearly. Drivers slowing near my driveway, residents whispering during evening walks, a man in tennis shoes shaking his head like I had personally lowered his property value by wanting privacy. Rachel set the newsletter down carefully. She was building a record for social pressure before she ever sued. I nodded toward the window, where the new cedar fence stood dark and straight in the rain. And I was building an actual fence. The next morning, we drove to the county records office before I opened the shop. The building smelled like floor wax, old paper, and coffee that had given up before sunrise. County clerk and Wilkes met us at the counter after Rachel explained what we needed. and was small, silver-haired, and had the calm authority of someone who had watched generations of people discover that their memory was not stronger than a filed document. I gave her my parcel number, the Pine Hollow subdivision name, and a copy of the lawsuit. She read the first page, lifted one eyebrow, and disappeared into the back room. When she returned, she carried a rolled plat map, a covenant index, and a folder stamped with dates older than Pine Hollow's entrance columns. She spread the plat across a large table and weighted the corners with tape dispensers. There it was, my farmhouse parcel drawn like a stubborn island beside the neat subdivision lots. In faded ink, beside the boundary line, were 3 words that made Rachel inhale sharply. Excluded Tract A, and tapped the notation with one finger. This parcel was never submitted into the declaration, she said. The original owner kept it separate when the subdivision was recorded. I looked down at the line on the map, straight and quiet, older than Evelyn's rules, older than her fines, older than every glossy newsletter she had used to make me look unreasonable. For the first time since the summons hit my porch, I felt the story shift under my feet. Evelyn had sued me over a fence, but the county had just handed me the line that could tear her authority apart. And Wilkes did not let us leave with the original plat, but she certified a copy, so clean it felt heavier than the lawsuit itself. The county seal pressed into the paper near the words excluded Tract A, and when I slid that page into Rachel's folder, I felt the same satisfaction I felt when a cabinet door closed perfectly on the first try. Not joy. Precision. Rachel photographed the map, the covenant index, and the declaration pages showing every parcel that Pine Hollow actually covered. My parcel number was not there. My legal description was not there. The Bell Estate signature was not there. Pine Hollow had built its stone entrance near my farmhouse, wrapped its landscaping around the road, and spent years acting like proximity was the same as membership. It was not. On the drive home, Rachel kept reading the certified copy like it might change if she blinked. She sued you without checking this? She asked. I looked through the windshield at the wet road, curving past manicured lawns and matching mailbox posts. No, I said. She sued me because she assumed nobody would check it after her. That afternoon, I called attorney Samuel Price, a land use lawyer whose office sat above a hardware store downtown. Samuel had the slowest speaking voice I had ever heard from a man who billed by the hour, but he also had a reputation for treating recorded documents like loaded weather reports. I emailed him the summons, my deed, the certified plat, the covenant index, Evelyn's letters, the fine notices, and the newsletter. 20 minutes later, his assistant called back and said Samuel wanted to see me before 5. His office smelled like old books, lemon polish, and printer toner. He read quietly while Rachel and I sat across from him, the blue chalk line from my tool belt resting on the edge of the folder because I had forgotten to take it off. Samuel paused when he reached the newsletter, then again when he reached the daily fines. She continued enforcement after you notified her in writing that you were not a member? He asked. 3 times, Rachel said. 4 if you count the lawsuit. Samuel nodded once and tapped the certified plat. Then this is not just a fence dispute. This is an authority problem. Those words stayed with me all evening. An authority problem. That was exactly what Evelyn was. She did not just want the fence down. She wanted the right to decide who could say no. By the time I got home, a new orange notice was taped to my mailbox, sealed inside a plastic sleeve so the rain would not ruin the performance. Final demand before enforcement action. It listed the same fake fines, the same architectural violations, and a new charge for legal escalation review. I stood beside the mailbox while 2 Pine Hollow residents slowed their evening walk to stare. One of them looked at my fence and whispered something to the other. Across the road, Evelyn's white SUV was parked near the entrance again, engine running, headlights off. I pulled the notice down, held it up toward my security camera so the timestamp caught it, and smiled before I could stop myself. She had no idea the county had already answered the question she was pretending to ask. That night, Rachel and I called Howard Bell, the oldest son of the woman who sold me the farmhouse. He was living in Knoxville, retired, and still sharp enough to remember the developer's name from 30 years earlier. Pine Hollow tried to buy that farmhouse parcel twice, Howard told us over speakerphone. Mom refused both times. She said she was not signing her front porch into a committee. Rachel looked at me across the table and mouthed perfect. Howard promised to send a written statement and old correspondence from his mother's files. After the call, I walked out to the workshop. The cedar fence stood in the moonlight, wet, straight, and quiet. I snapped my father's blue chalk line once against a scrapboard, leaving a bright, clean mark across the grain. Evelyn had built her case on assumption. I was building mine on lines that had been measured, recorded, and remembered. By the next morning, Evelyn had turned her lawsuit into neighborhood theater. Pine Hollow's newsletter landed in mailboxes before 8, printed on glossy paper with a photo of the stone entrance on the front and her president's message inside, polished enough to sound reasonable if you did not know the ground under it. She wrote about the importance of uniform standards, the danger of allowing one property owner to ignore established architectural harmony, and the board's duty to protect the community from visual disruption near the entrance corridor. She still did not use my name, but my fence was the only new cedar fence beside that entrance, and my farmhouse was the only old house sitting outside their perfect pattern like a nail they could not hammer flat. By 9, people were slowing their cars as they passed. By noon, 2 residents had stopped on the sidewalk to take pictures. One man in a golf vest shook his head and said loud enough for me to hear, "Some people just do not care what they do to property values." I was in the workshop, sanding a maple cabinet door, and the old blue chalk line was hanging above my bench like it was waiting for me to remember who I was. Straight lines do not get straighter because people approve of them. They stay straight because they were measured correctly in the first place. So I did what Samuel Price told me to do. I documented everything. Rachel came over with a scanner, a label maker, and the kind of quiet anger that alphabetizes itself. We saved the newsletter, photographed the cars, downloaded the security camera footage, and built a timeline from the first violation letter to the final demand Evelyn taped to my mailbox after the certified plat had already proved Pine Hollow had no claim. Samuel filed our response 3 days later. It was not dramatic. It was better than dramatic. It was simple. Daniel Mercer is not a member of Pine Hollow Homeowners Association. His property is identified in county records as excluded Tract A. No recorded covenant subjects his parcel to Pine Hollow restrictions. The fence sits within his boundary. The association has no authority to assess fines, demand architectural approval, or seek removal. He also filed a motion asking the court to dismiss their claim and order them to reimburse my legal costs. When I read that last line, standing in his office above the hardware store while traffic hissed through rain below the windows, I felt something settle in my chest. Evelyn wanted me to explain myself to her. Now she would have to explain herself to a judge. That evening, she appeared at my fence with 2 board members and a man carrying a folder stamped architectural review. I walked out with my phone recording, sawdust still on my sleeves. Evelyn looked at the cedar boards like they offended her personally. "Mr. Mercer, you are making this more expensive than necessary," she said. "The board is still willing to resolve this if you remove the fence before the hearing." I glanced at the 2 board members. One would not meet my eyes. The other kept staring at the blue chalk line hooked to my belt. "Did you tell them about excluded Tract A?" I asked. Evelyn's face did not change, but the man with the folder shifted his weight. "This is not the place for legal interpretation," she said. "No," I said, looking toward the fence, the straight posts, the rain-dark soil, the stone Pine Hollow sign beyond the road. "That place is court." Her smile tightened then, just enough to show the first hairline crack. She had spent months making me look like the unreasonable neighbor. But lawsuits have a funny way of asking one clean question after all the noise burns off. Where does your authority come from? Evelyn had letters, newsletters, fines, and confidence. I had a deed, a certified plat, a covenant index, Howard Bell's statement, and a blue chalk line that had never cared who was watching. The week before the hearing, Pine Hollow started behaving like the fence had become contagious. Their landscapers stopped using my driveway to turn around. Delivery drivers finally learned the difference between my porch and the subdivision. Lots behind the stone sign. Residents still slowed down when they passed, but the looks had changed. Before, they looked at me like I was the problem. Now they looked at the cedar boards, then at the courthouse date printed on the public docket, then back at Evelyn's entrance sign as if a thought had begun working its way under the paint. Rachel noticed it first. She was sitting at my dining table with a red pen, reviewing Samuel Price's exhibit list while I sanded a cabinet face in the workshop with the side door open. "They are getting nervous," she called. "Who?" "The ones who believed her because believing her was easier." I wiped sawdust from my hands and came inside. The table was covered again, but this time the chaos had turned into rows. Exhibit A, my deed. Exhibit B, the certified plat marked excluded tract A. Exhibit C, the covenant index showing my parcel absent. Exhibit D, the tax record. Exhibit E, the photographs of the fence sitting inside the line. Exhibit F, Evelyn's violation letters sent after written notice. Exhibit G, the newsletter. Exhibit H, Howard Bell's sworn statement saying his mother refused to place the farmhouse under association. Control. Rachel had even placed my father's blue chalk line beside the folders, not as evidence, just as a reminder. The little metal case was scratched, chalk dust caught in every seam. The string still strong after years of cabinets, shelves, porch steps, and now one fence that had somehow dragged a whole association into court. Samuel called that evening and told us Evelyn's attorney had rejected settlement. Pine Hollow still wanted the fence removed, fines paid, and an agreement that I would submit future exterior changes for review. I laughed once, not because it was funny, but because there are moments when arrogance becomes too clean to be mistaken for confusion. Samuel did not laugh. Good, he said. Then the judge gets to ask the question. Which question? Where their authority comes from. The next morning, another Pine Hollow newsletter appeared online. This one said the board remained committed to defending standards against disruptive boundary claims. Boundary claims. I read that phrase, standing in my workshop while the sawdust collector hummed down to silence. Evelyn was still trying to make the issue sound blurry, as if my property line were a rumor and not a recorded fact. So I opened my laptop, saved the newsletter, printed it, dated it, and placed it in the growing file. That had become my rhythm. Do not react, record. Do not explain, preserve. Do not chase her noise, follow the line. 2 days before court, Howard Bell drove in from Knoxville in a dented blue pickup and stood with me beside the fence. He was in his 70s, thin as a rake handle, with a ball cap faded nearly white and eyes that kept moving over the farmhouse like memory had its own survey equipment. Mom hated that subdivision plan, he said, touching one cedar board with 2 fingers. Developer wanted this place for an entrance feature. She told him a home is not scenery. He handed me a folder with copies of old letters, including one from the original developer asking Mrs. Bell to reconsider joining the planned community for the sake of visual consistency. Her reply was 1 page, typed on a machine old enough to leave uneven ink. I declined to subject my home to future committee control. I read that sentence 3 times. It sounded like a door locking across 30 years. On the morning of the hearing, I dressed in my plain navy jacket, put the blue chalk line in my toolbox instead of my pocket, and drove to the courthouse with Rachel beside me and Samuel's exhibit binder on my lap. Evelyn arrived 10 minutes after us in a cream coat, flanked by 2 board members and her attorney, carrying a glossy color map of Pine Hollow like it was a flag. She saw me in the hallway and gave me that same calm smile from the night of the summons. Last chance to be reasonable, Mr. Mercer, she said. I looked at the map under her arm, then at the certified plat in Samuel's binder. That is why I came, I said. Then the clerk opened the courtroom door, and all of us walked toward the only room where her confidence would finally have to meet the record. The courtroom was smaller than Evelyn's confidence needed it to be. There were no chandeliers, no dramatic wooden rail, no crowd waiting to gasp at every sentence. Just fluorescent lights, 10 walls, a seal behind the bench, and rows of chairs filled with people who had come expecting a simple fence dispute. Rachel sat behind me with her notebook open and the same calm expression she wore when a customer argued about a bookstore return policy. Howard Bell sat 2 seats down, his faded ball cap folded in his hands. Across the aisle, Evelyn arranged her papers with careful little taps, lining up photographs, violation letters, and the glossy Pine Hollow map as if neatness could turn assumption into law. Her attorney, a young man in a charcoal suit, kept whispering to her, but she barely listened. She was watching me. I could feel it without looking, the same stare from the white SUV, the same belief that if she remained polished long enough, everyone else would become unreasonable by comparison. Judge Margaret Collins entered at 9 sharp, and the room stood. She was not dramatic either. That was what made her dangerous to people like Evelyn. She had gray hair pulled back, reading glasses low on her nose, and the calm impatience of someone who had seen too many neighbors confuse preference with jurisdiction. Pine Hollow's attorney spoke first. He called the fence a non-conforming structure near a protected entrance corridor. He used words like community impact, architectural standards, visual continuity, and irreparable harm. Evelyn nodded at every phrase like she had written them herself, which she probably had. He handed the judge photographs of my cedar fence, taken from angles that made it look like Pine Hollow's entrance had been wounded by wood. He handed over the bylaws. He handed over the architectural guidelines. He handed over the newsletter, which he called a public communication regarding standards. Judge Collins listened, made notes, and finally asked, "Is the defendant a member of the association?" The attorney smiled slightly, the way people smile when they think the easy question helps them. "Your Honor, the property is adjacent to the Pine Hollow entrance and has historically functioned within the entrance corridor." Judge Collins looked up over her glasses. "That was not my question." The room changed. Not loudly, but completely. Samuel Price rose beside me, slow as a gate opening. "Your Honor, may I provide the recorded documents?" Judge Collins nodded. Samuel placed our exhibit binder on the clerk's table. The deed, the certified plat, the covenant index, the tax parcel record, Howard Bell's statement, and the old developer letter asking Mrs. Bell to join the subdivision for the sake of visual consistency. He did not wave them around. He did not make speeches. He simply put the record where it belonged. Evelyn's attorney flipped through his own folder faster now. Evelyn leaned toward him and whispered something, her pearls catching the overhead light. Samuel opened the certified plat to the page and Wilkes had stamped at the county office and pointed to the notation beside my farmhouse parcel. "Excluded Tract A," he said. "The defendant's property was reserved out of the subdivision at the time Pine Hollow was recorded. It was never submitted into the declaration, never assigned voting rights, never assessed dues, and never made subject to architectural control." Judge Collins took the document, read it once, then looked at Pine Hollow's attorney. "Where is your recorded covenant binding this parcel?" He cleared his throat. "Your Honor, our position is that the parcel is functionally integrated with the community entrance." Judge Collins set down the plat. "Functionally integrated is not the same as legally encumbered." I heard Rachel's pen stop moving behind me. Howard Bell lowered his head, not in defeat, but in the kind of quiet satisfaction that comes when someone finally reads the old words out loud. Evelyn's face had not broken yet, but the smile was gone. Her glossy map sat on the table between them, full of color and curves and made-up certainty. The certified plat sat beside it in plain black lines. For the first time since the summons hit my porch, the prettier paper was losing. Judge Collins let the silence sit for a few seconds, and in that silence, every decorative word Pine Hollow had brought into the room seemed to lose weight. Architectural harmony, entrance corridor, community impact, visual continuity. They sounded expensive, but none of them sounded recorded. Evelyn's attorney tried again, this time opening the bylaws and pointing to a section about exterior modifications visible from common areas. "Your Honor, the association has clear standards governing improvements that affect the appearance of Pine Hollow Estates." Judge Collins looked at the page, then back at him. "Standards governing whose property?" He paused. "Properties within the community." "And where is the document showing this property is within the community?" Samuel did not smile, but I saw his fingers rest lightly on our exhibit binder, ready. Evelyn leaned toward her attorney and whispered again, sharper this time. He pulled out the glossy map and placed it beside the certified plat. The map was beautiful. I had to give them that. Pine Hollow was shaded in soft green and pale gold, with walking paths drawn like ribbons. The entrance road curved elegantly past my farmhouse, and my fence area colored as part of something labeled Gateway Landscape Zone. It looked like the kind of document people hang in sales offices to convince buyers the future has already been decided. Judge Collins studied it for maybe 10 seconds. "Who prepared this?" she asked. "The association's planning consultant," the attorney said. "Was it recorded with the county?" "It reflects the community's operational layout." That was not my question. The same phrase landed a second time, and this time it hit harder. Rachel shifted behind me, and I could feel her trying not to make a sound. Samuel stood and handed the judge the covenant index certified by N. Wilkes. "Your Honor, this index lists the parcels subject to the Pine Hollow Declaration. Mr. Mercer's parcel is not listed." The original Bell farmhouse tract was expressly excluded. We also have the tax record showing a separate parcel identification number and no homeowners association dues assessed or paid. Evelyn's face had gone still in the way people go still when movement might reveal panic. She looked at the judge, then at the glossy map, then at the certified plat, as if one of them might suddenly change sides. Her attorney turned pages faster now. The association has historically maintained the area surrounding the entrance, including landscaping near the defendant's property. Judge Collins said, maintaining nearby landscaping does not create authority over a neighboring parcel. Samuel added, the defendant repeatedly notified the association of this before the lawsuit. The association continued sending fines anyway. He placed the letters on the table, one after another, each envelope dated, each response attached, each fine increasing after my deed had already been mailed to Evelyn's office. The judge read the first, then the second, then the final demand taped to my mailbox. Mrs. Hartwell, she said, and Evelyn straightened as if her name had been called at a board meeting. Were you aware that Mr. Mercer disputed association authority before filing this claim? Evelyn's voice came out smooth but thinner than before. We believed his objection was an attempt to avoid compliance. Did you check the recorded declaration? Evelyn looked to her attorney. The judge waited. No one rescued her. Our management office relied on association maps and long-standing understanding, she said. Judge Collins removed her glasses and set them on the bench. Long-standing understanding is not a substitute for recorded authority. The room was so quiet I could hear the air vent above us and the soft scrape of Howard Bell's shoe against the floor. Then Samuel opened the old letter from Mrs. Bell, the one refusing to sign her porch into future committee control. He read only the relevant sentence, calm and plain. I decline to subject my home to future committee control. The words moved through the courtroom like my father's blue chalk lines snapping against wood, leaving one bright mark that could not be brushed away. Judge Collins looked from the old letter to the plat, from the plat to the bylaws, and finally to Evelyn. Her expression did not change, but her voice cooled by several degrees. Before this court addresses the fence, I need the plaintiff to answer the threshold issue. What legal right did Pine Hollow Homeowners Association have to regulate this property at all? Evelyn did not answer. Her attorney did not answer. And for the first time since she served me papers on my own porch, the burden was no longer on me to prove I was free. It was on her to prove I had ever belonged to her. The courtroom waited for Pine Hollow to produce authority, and all Pine Hollow had was paper that looked important until someone asked where it had been recorded. Evelyn's attorney turned through his binder again, slower this time, as if a missing covenant might appear between glossy photographs and architectural guidelines if he treated the pages gently enough. Judge Collins watched him for a moment, then looked down at the certified plat on her bench. The county seal caught the fluorescent light. Excluded Tract A sat there in black ink, quiet and stubborn, the same way my farmhouse had sat beside Pine Hollow for decades while everyone pretended closeness meant control. Your Honor, the attorney said finally, the association believed in good faith that the entrance corridor fell within its governing authority. Judge Collins looked over her glasses. Belief does not create a covenant. Evelyn's fingers tightened around her pen. I could see the white at her knuckles from where I sat. The same woman who had watched me from her white SUV, smiled at my porch, sent fines after receiving my deed, and printed my fence into a neighborhood scandal now sat perfectly still because the room no longer rewarded confidence. Samuel Price stood again, his voice low and even. The defendant notified the association multiple times that his property was not subject to Pine Hollow restrictions. Rather than verify the record, the association increased fines, published statements implying noncompliance, and filed suit seeking removal of a fence built on private property. He placed the photographs of my fence on the table, followed by the setback measurements and county parcel record. There is no evidence that Mr. Mercer's land was ever submitted to the declaration. Judge Collins nodded once, then turned to Evelyn directly. Mrs. Hartwell, are you the president of the Plaintiff Association? Evelyn swallowed. Yes, Your Honor. And did you authorize continued enforcement against this property? After receiving his written objection and deed, Evelyn opened her mouth, closed it, and looked at her attorney. Judge Collins did not move. Mrs. Hartwell, this is not a board meeting. Please answer the question. A quiet ripple moved through the seats behind us. Rachel's pen hovered above her notebook. Howard Bell stared straight ahead, his mother's old letter resting in Samuel's binder like a voice waiting its turn. I relied on our management materials, Evelyn said. That is not what I asked. Her voice was smaller when she answered again. Yes. Judge Collins wrote something down. The sound of her pen against paper felt louder than every notice Evelyn had ever mailed me. Then the judge leaned back and said the sentence that ended the whole performance. Based on the recorded documents before this court, Mr. Mercer's property was never part of Pine Hollow Homeowners Association. Evelyn froze. Not dramatically, not with a gasp or a collapse. She simply stopped, pen in hand, eyes fixed on the bench as if the words had removed the floor beneath her and left her too proud to look down. Judge Collins continued, each sentence clean enough to cut through months of noise. The association has not shown authority to regulate his fence, assess fines against him, require architectural approval, or seek injunctive relief under its governing documents. The claim for removal is dismissed. The fines are void. The court will consider the defendant's request for costs and fees. I did not smile. I did not look at Evelyn. I looked at the certified plat, the same plain black line and Wilkes had spread across the county table, and I thought about my father's blue chalk line snapping against wood. A true line does not need to shout. It only needs to be read by someone willing to see it. Behind me, Rachel let out a breath she had been holding for half the hearing. Howard Bell lowered his head, and I saw his shoulders shake once, not from laughter, but from relief that his mother's refusal had survived every newsletter, every fine, every polished lie. Evelyn's attorney gathered the glossy map first, folding it too quickly and creasing the corner. Evelyn still did not move. The judge had not just ruled on offense. She had named the thing Evelyn feared most. There had never been any authority there to lose. The hallway outside the courtroom was quieter than I expected after a win. No one cheered. No one clapped. Evelyn walked past me with her attorney at her side, her cream coat buttoned wrong, the glossy map tucked under his arm with one corner crushed from the way he had folded it too fast. She did not look at me. That was all right. For months she had looked at me too much, from her white SUV, from the entrance road, from the other side of my fence, from every letter written, as if my home were an error she could correct. Now the court record was looking back at her, and it did not blink. Samuel Price stopped near the elevator and handed me a copy of the judge's signed order. Dismissed. Fines void. No authority over the defendant's property. Costs and fees reserved for further review. The words were plain, almost boring, and that made them beautiful. Rachel read them twice before folding the page carefully and sliding it into the binder beside the certified plat. Howard Bell stood by the window, looking out toward the courthouse steps, and said softly, "Mom would have liked that, Judge." I thought about Mrs. Bell refusing to sign her porch into future committee control, about my father's blue chalk line, about every cedar post I had set in rain-soft ground, while Pine Hollow watched like I was stealing from them by keeping what was mine. 2 weeks later, the fee order came through. Pine Hollow had to reimburse my legal costs and withdraw every notice, every fine, and every public statement implying my fence violated their governing documents. The board also had to mail a correction letter to every homeowner explaining that my farmhouse parcel was not part of the association and that no homeowner dues should be spent enforcing rules against excluded property. That letter did more damage to Evelyn than the court hearing did. Courtrooms are private until people read the order. Mailboxes are public in the quietest way. By the next board meeting, residents wanted to know why their money had paid for a lawsuit against a man who had never belonged to them. They asked why Evelyn ignored my deed. They asked why the newsletter made me sound like a threat when the county record had been available the entire time. Evelyn resigned before the vote to censure her, calling it a personal decision made for the good of the community. Pine Hollow's new acting president sent me a short apology on plain paper, no crest, no decorative border, no language about harmony. I kept it in the binder anyway. The fence stayed exactly where I built it. The shortcut traffic stopped. The landscapers quit turning around in my gravel drive. Delivery drivers finally learned that the old farmhouse was not Lot Zero, not an entrance feature, not a rustic backdrop for someone else's subdivision. It was my home. On a clear Saturday morning, Rachel came over with coffee, and Howard mailed me a copy of his mother's refusal letter in a simple wooden frame. I hung it in the workshop above the labeled cabinet, right beside my father's old blue chalk line. Then I went outside, snapped that chalk line across the last board I had not trimmed yet, and cut it clean. The sound of the saw drifted over the tomato beds, the cedar fence, and the quiet road beyond Pine Hollow's stone sign. When I finished, I screwed a small sign to the inside of the gate where only people coming through my yard could read it. Private property. Not homeowners association controlled. It was not flashy. It was not angry. It did not need to be. The straightest lines in life are usually the ones people try hardest to blur, but a recorded deed, a certified plat, an old letter, and one judge willing to ask the right question had put mine back in ink. Evelyn thought she sued me over a fence. What she really did was prove, in court, that her authority ended before my first cedar post began.